So we're starting 2026 off a little bit differently. So hi, if we haven't met before, I'm Katrina Walser from Oliphant, and I'm a knitting teacher, designer and tech editor based in Sydney, Australia. But as you may be able to tell from my background, this isn't Sydney at all. So I am currently in North Carolina visiting some family. And so I'm in the US and it is winter and it's freakishly warm for winter. So I'm just sitting out on the back deck and it's lovely. Now, it's currently the 7th of January, and another way that we're starting the year off a bit differently is that I'm having a lot of trouble with my knitting, which happens occasionally, but not usually this badly. So I started out the year with a fresh plate. I had no whips, so I wanted to start just with a quick, easy FO, and I cast on a beanie. So I have this beanie that was gifted to my daughter, and I really like how it fits. So if you take a look, this is the shape of it. I like this space here at the top, but it's for a child, so it doesn't really fit me quite right. So I wanted my own. I also liked that it looked like stockinette. And the closest knitting pattern that I could find to this was a Stockholm hat by Petite Knit, but that's in ribbing. So I decided I would try and make it myself in stockinette. So this is as far as I've gotten. And I kid you not, this is probably my 8th or 9th attempt at this beanie. I just couldn't figure out how to do the cast on right because I was starting it top down. And so I had to cast on here at the top, and then I had to do a bunch of increases, and the increases weren't stacking correctly either. And I finally thought that I had it, but then I tried it on and the shape just still isn't quite right. It just looks a bit silly in a way that the red one doesn't look silly, or the Stockholm hat doesn't look silly. And I've been thinking about it, and I think the crucial difference is that for a beanie like this to work, it probably has to be in ribbing. Because when I try this beanie on, it feels quite tight, and I think that's part of what's giving the space at the top of the beanie. And I thought maybe I could make the circumference just a bit smaller, but even every time I try and make it smaller and smaller, it still doesn't feel the same. So I think I'm gonna just have to bite the bullet and turn it into a ribbed beanie. So this is 8-ply yarn, which is what the Stockholm hat wants. So I think what I'm going to do is have one more attempt at making it myself, because I'm stubborn like that and I just want to know that I can do it. And if that still doesn't work, I will just buy the pattern and make the Stockholm hat, and I'll have a nice beanie to show for it. So the ribbing attempt went pretty well. I did have to redo some sections here and there just to figure out exactly how many increases I wanted in the crown, but I actually went away at this point for the weekend and I forgot to bring the second ball of yarn with me, so it wasn't too big of a deal that I had to undo stuff because I had nothing else to knit on anyway. And this is what it looked like at the end of the first ball of yarn. So the yarn I'm using for this is called Zelana Rumu Duque and is a possum fur yarn from New Zealand. In New Zealand, possums are a pest, so they're allowed to use their pelts to make yarn. It's a really interesting texture. To me it feels furry as opposed to fuzzy like a mohair. If you've used this before, let me know what your experience was, because I'm curious to hear other people's thoughts on it. So I don't love the process of spit splicing yarn, but I do like that you have less ends to weave in. And since this was so furry, I figured it would spit splice well. I'm one of those people who swears that actual spit works better than just using water, so to do this I suck on the ends, which is admittedly pretty gross, and then I separate the plies a bit and interleave them so the ends integrate better. Then you rub a lot and hope it works, and then you try again if it doesn't. So I got the beanie to the length I wanted, and this is the point at which knitting it top down paid off, because I could try it on and see if I liked it. And at this point, after fussing with the brim a bit, I decided it was finally looking pretty good. I wanted to do a tubular bind off, and that would need some dedicated time to sit down and work on it, so I cast on another project that I could work on in the car. Between flying back to Sydney and settling into life back at home, I didn't get much footage of anything else in January, so I'll talk about what I made in a wrap up at the end of this video. When I did get a chance to do the tubular bind off, I started off with a very pink knits tutorial. I have done tubular bind offs before, but even with that, there was something about it that I just couldn't quite get the hang of. I kept having to undo and redo the bind off. I've realised though that a tubular bind off is basically just grafting on a single needle, and I know how to graft on 2 needles, so I just split the stitches onto 2 needles and did a regular graft to bind off. If anyone's curious about how to do this, just let me know in the comments and I'll try and describe it in more detail. And after lots and lots of sewing for the bind off, the beanie was finally done. Hi, it's the beginning of February and I have nothing on my needles, so I need to cast something on. And the thing I really need to work on is my entry for the Easter show, which is due at the end of March. And I have an old baby blanket pattern called Southern Shawl that I will insert pictures of here because it's a bit tricky to show you on camera. But I wanted to convert this into a shawl pattern because I really love the way the pattern worked out, but I think more people would be able to knit a shawl than a baby blanket. So that's going to be my entry for the Easter show, but I need to sit down and find the time to look through the pattern and convert it into a shawl. And I don't know when I'm going to get the chance to do that. So in the meantime, I have a bunch of scraps left over from the cushion covers I was making my sister at the end of last year. There are tiny bits of each of the contrast colors left, and it feels like it would be a shame to break up the colors because they work really nicely together. So I'd like to be able to use them in a different pattern, and I'm going to go looking for some baby cardigans, I think, or jumpers, because I'm on a bit of a charity baby knits kick. So I'm going to go see what I can find on Ravelry and cast that on instead for now. I use the Ravelry Advanced filters for most of my pattern searches. If you haven't used them before, I'll post a link to a video I made about Ravelry searching up here in the corner because they're a very useful tool. After filtering down, I found this super cute free pattern called the Growing Garden Cardigan by Sandy Rosner, and as a bonus, it was knit using slip stitches, which is one of my favorite techniques. The only downside is that it was for a cardigan and I wanted to make a jumper, but it was pretty easy to convert. I sat down and knit the pattern as written for about 2 inches, then I joined to work in the round and followed the pattern from there, but I did have to convert the wrong side rows to right side ones as I knit. Hi, so I started working on the shawl yesterday and the pattern's going to take a bit longer than I thought to make, which I probably shouldn't be surprised at this point. Everything takes a bit longer than I think it's going to, but it's better than having to write it from scratch. I will give you that, but it's going to take a bit of work to rejig it from the blanket. So I'll show you what the problem is. So the blanket's a hexagon, which means it's made up of 6 of these triangles, and a regular triangle shawl is made up of 2 triangles. So I thought I could just take 2 of the triangles and turn them into a shawl, but if you measure along that top edge of 2 of the triangles, even if you try and straighten it out and make it a bit longer, it's too short. So a shawl is normally meant to be about 70 inches wide, and this is only, I think, somewhere between 45 and 50. So it's just a bit too narrow. So I thought initially I could just make the seed stitch part really, really big and then have these bits more of a border. But when I sat down and looked at the numbers, it would be more than half the shawl of seed stitch. And I didn't want that. It didn't seem as fun. So I'd rather keep the balance of the sections the same. So I sat down and rejigged all of them into being wider panels. And it was a bit of annoying with the lace parts because I had to do essentially some repeats of the lace. This one was easy enough, but this one took a bit more rejigging, and hopefully it will look fine once I've got it actually knit up. So I think I have all the numbers set up, but I need to sit down and actually write some instructions, and then that way I can test out the instructions as I actually knit the shawl. So the yarn for this shawl was all gathered from different indie dyers at the 2025 Australian Yarn Show, since I thought it'd be a nice idea to highlight different local dyers in the pattern. I spent some time taking some nice photos of the yarn palette, since I figured it'd be nice to see them all together before I started winding them up. But I'll take you through each skein as I begin working with it throughout the video. So here's my first skein. It's from Karina from Louie and Lola, and she is an amazing dyer down in Tasmania. She's also a really great actor in the community. She organizes a lot of fundraising events and things like that, and so I'm very excited to work with her yarn because I haven't done a lot of it previously. So this is on her 8-ply BFL base, which is 100% wool, but it is superwash. And the color is called Doodle, which is a gorgeous sort of yellowy cream neutral. And I'm really lucky that she gifted this to me so I could work on the design, and I'm excited to get it wound up so I'm ready to start on the shawl. This shawl starts off with a garter tab cast on, which I find I have to concentrate on, but once you finish that, the first section is just seed stitch with some increases. So it makes for a very portable project, at least at the beginning. I managed to take it out with me to a cafe and work on it on the bus home too. So I finished the first section of the shawl and it went really quickly actually, so it helped that it was just seed stitch. I did have to rejig the border a little bit because at first when I made it, it was a little bit too skinny. So I added an extra stitch to the edges and I'm quite liking how it's turning out. So let's take a look. So here it is. It's so nice and squishy. The stitch definition is amazing on the seed stitch. And the border is about the same width as the center spine, which I'm happy with. And once everything's all blocked, it should show the holes for the increases a bit more nicely, which I quite like these lacy sort of increases. And yarn overs are just the easiest type of increase to make, so that's also a positive. Now I was curious to see how it compared to the blanket, just because I am trying to make sure that this is bigger than the blanket, because that was part of the whole rewrite of the pattern. So I laid the blanket out up here, and if we compare this against two of the blanket segments. So here's the center spine. It is coming out quite a bit bigger. So the seed stitch in the blanket ends about here, and this is ending all the way up in the middle of this lace section of the blanket. So I think we're succeeding in making it larger, and I'm very excited to do all of the next colors. So the next color that I've got is from Daffodil Road, and she is a lovely dyer in Queensland. So I first met Sarah and found out about Daffodil Road at the yarn show last year in Canberra, where I bought all of these yarns, and I really wanted to feature her because she was lovely and her colors were lovely too. So this yellowy color is called Salted Caramel, and it is on her 8-ply merino base. And I'm not sure if this is superwash or not. I don't think it is because it says hand wash recommended, but I will double check for you and let you know. The next section of the shawl was lace, and while it was a lot of fun, I had to concentrate on the knitting and the chart, so I mostly did it on the couch at home. I used to be a strictly monogamous knitter, but I find now that always having both a simple project and a more complicated one on the needles is great, because I always have something to work on while I'm out and about. So I ended the month off working on my growing garden cardigan at various locations around my house. I'm not planning on focusing much on this cardigan in the coming months. It'll just be something I have if I need some downtime between more complicated things. So it's the end of February, and like I mentioned at the end of the January section, there were large chunks of time in January and also in Feb, to be honest, that I was a bit too busy to film in. And so I do have some whole projects that I didn't get to actually take any footage of as I knit them. So I'll take you through everything that I knit in Jan and Feb just quickly, just to have a record of all the stuff that I did. So first off, here is the infamous beanie. And it turned out very nicely, if I do say so myself. I did wear it quite a bit at the end of the trip. And I haven't blocked it or woven in any ends, but I might do that a bit closer to when I actually wear it. In April or May is usually when it starts to get into beanie weather. All right, after that, the main yarn that I still had with me in the States was some yarn that I'd used for a project in December, which was a cushion cover. Now, the majority of the yarn was Bendigo Woolen Mills Classic in 8-ply, and the color was called Straw. So it's this sort of yellowy neutral. And I figured I would just cast on some quick baby knits. I have some charities that I know that need baby knitwear. So this is a pattern called Flax by Tin Can Knits. And I've been curious to try it for a while because it is the pattern that most people recommend as your first beginner jumper. So this is the first time in a long time that I've made no alterations to a pattern. I just picked it up and knit it, and it was so good to just bang it out. So I'm pretty sure I knit this on a 4mm needle, and I don't remember what size this is. I think it might be the 12 to 18 month size. So very straightforward. It has this nice garter panel here on the sleeves. But other than that, it's a pretty simple top-down raglan. I didn't bother with the short rows in the back because it recommends that you don't for baby knits, so that it's just reversible. And hopefully someone can get some use out of this, and it goes to a baby who needs it. Now, the other baby knits that I cast on is also mostly in the straw color, but this is a pattern called French Macaroon. It's very, very simple. It's just a big T shape. So there's no actual shaping in the sleeves. You just knit upwards in 2 separate rectangles for the front and the back, and then you cast on a bunch of stitches straight at the underarm to form the sleeves, and you keep knitting back and forth. It is knit in 2 separate pieces. I could have figured out how to adapt it to work in the round, and I did sort of want to at first, but then I couldn't be bothered, so I just did it as the pattern was written. Again, I think this is a 12 to 18 month size, but the thing that tripped me up with this is that I couldn't figure out the top part with the colors. So here's the thing with me. I keep wanting to be relaxed and go with the flow and just try playing with colors and see how they turn out, but I don't think I can. I'm a little bit too particular with how things turn out. So I had to rip the colors out for this so many times because I was insisting on using scraps. And it turns out that I don't have the best sense for how far a particular scrap will go. So I would work a particular section and then work the next section, and then the yarn would run out in a weird time. And so I'd undo it again and introduce a different colored yarn, and it was just a bit of a mess for a while. But I got it working in the end. So I think between the front and the back, there are maybe 4 or 5 different yarns in here, and I'm not going to bother going through all of them, but if you'd like to know the details, then I will put a link to my Ravelry project for this down below. And they're all 4-ply colors held double. So you got a nice sort of mild effect going on, which I think helped with the fact that I was using lots of different colors, because it means that they all just sort of blended nicely together. And I found a button that worked really nicely with the contrast colors. And so I'm really glad with how this worked out. And then the last thing I knit in January is hilarious. My younger niece has a favorite toy. And for some reason, all at around the same time, my daughter and both my nieces all separately came and asked me if I could knit a jumper for Bun Bun. I don't know if they all agreed that they would come and ask me, but I thought it was really sweet. So I made a jumper for Bun Bun. So this toy is called, I think it's called a Riff Raff. Again, I'll put it on screen. It's a fairly common little lovey. So if you do have one of these, or if your kid has one of these, I'm happy to try and explain how I made the pattern. Just get in touch with me and I'll write it out properly in my Ravelry page. The weirdest part about this is that the bunny basically has no neck. So it was quite difficult to figure out how to knit the jumper. So essentially what I ended up doing was I cast on here at the neck and then I joined in the round and only worked like one row before I split and worked separately in the front and the back. So I worked the ribbing for this section here separately and that formed the armholes, and then I joined again and then kept going down. And then after that, it was a pretty basic square pattern where I just increased along the diagonals. And I do have some footage, so I'll cut it in here as I talk. Now, the problem with this though, is that I actually increased along the wrong lines. So the way it should work is that you want your increased lines to be going towards the corners of the square. But I sort of just started increasing along where a raglan would normally sit, which is underneath the neck at the front and the back, and then just sort of increasing out like that. But actually, if I'd been doing it properly, I needed to have increased along the center of the front and the back, and then underneath the underarms. So I ended up having to do this weird thing where I knit a square that ended up being more like a diamond against the rabbit's body, and then I had to add triangles at the end to get it to be a square that was sitting in the correct orientation. And I think I made my triangles a bit too big. So it worked out okay. It looks more like a pixie dress, but I have actually shown my niece and she's pretty happy with it. I should have given it to her earlier. Her birthday was in January and I'm still sitting on this at the end of Feb. I haven't knit or sewn in the ends yet and I need to block it. So I need to get on that ASAP so she can finally have her birthday present. So this was knit out of 4-ply Bo Peep from West Yorkshire Spinners, which I think is a sort of 50-50 mix of wool and nylon. And so yes, this is Bun Bun's jumper and hopefully I'll be finished with it soon, but I am counting it as an FO for yarn counting purposes because I've used up all the yarn that I'm going to for the jumper. So those are all of the knits that I made in Jan, and I think 4 FOs is a pretty good start to the year, even though it was a bit slow to begin with the beanie. And they are admittedly very small knits, but it's still a good sort of beginning. And I used up 1,074 meters of yarn in January. Now, in Feb, I just had 2 whips and I didn't finish either of them, which is totally fine. So this is the little charity jumper that I cast on that I just have as an in-between project. And so I am still trying to work through making sure that each of the scraps gets used up, but it turns out that it uses less of the contrast colors than I thought. So I think I'm only really going to end up using up the green, but it's going pretty well. And I think this is just going to be a long running whip that I have on the side when I need it. And then the shawl is going quite well. It's knitting up faster than I thought, which is really fun. So here's where my progress is so far. And I have 3 more colors to go. So I'm not going to count the yarn for either of these projects as being out of my stash because they are still whips. So I'll count them at the end of the projects. So that could be in a while from now. So in total, my stash now at the end of February is at 37,546 meters. So I unfortunately had to buy a bunch of yarn while I was in America because I promised my mum a shirt and the yarn for it is way easier to get in the States than it is here in Australia. So that actually was about 1,200 meters, which is more than I used up in January, which is a shame. But this is the last amount of yarn that I'm hoping to acquire anytime soon. I am going to a yarn festival in March, so wish me luck. I usually am pretty good about not buying yarn if I'm on a no buy, but I do end up compensating by buying accessories instead. So I will keep you up to date with how that goes. So if you'd like to see my Herculean attempt at self-control in March, then I will post my March vlog at the beginning of April. And so you can subscribe to the channel right here if you'd like updates on when that comes out. And you can also watch a list of my previous vlogs and videos down here below. And until next time, I've been Katrina Wallisoff from Oliphant Cat. Happy knitting!